Before we begin, take a second and subscribe to the channel. These old American crime stories are long, strange, and unforgettable, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The snow was falling so hard that night in 1839 that it swallowed sound. No wind, no voices, just white darkness pressing in from every side. By morning, the Carter cabin was empty. The fire was still warm. A pot of stew sat half-eaten on the table. 4 coats were gone from their hooks. 4 pairs of boots were missing from the door. But there were no tracks in the snow, not one. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no note. The Carter family, Jacob, his wife Margaret, and their 2 children, Thomas and Eliza, had vanished sometime during the night. No graves were ever found, and to this day there are still no answers. That should have been impossible. The snow around the cabin was smooth and untouched, like no one had walked there for days, yet the family was gone, as if the night itself had taken them. When the neighbors arrived, they stood in silence, staring at the ground, waiting to see something, anything that could explain how 4 people disappeared without leaving a trace. But there was nothing, and what frightened them most was not what they saw, it was what they didn't. Now let's go back, before the snow fell, before the silence, before the night that erased a family. In the winter of 1839, the town of Mill Creek sat quietly in upstate New York. It was small, cold, and forgotten by most of the country. A single dirt road ran through it. Wooden houses stood far apart, surrounded by trees that groaned when winter winds passed through. Life there was hard, but simple. Jacob Carter was known as a steady man. He was 38 years old, tall, with rough hands from years of cutting timber. He didn't drink much, he didn't gamble. He worked, went home, and cared for his family. Margaret Carter was kind and careful. She kept their home clean and warm, even in the worst winters. Their son, Thomas, was 12, old enough to help his father with chores. Their daughter, Eliza, was 8, quiet and thoughtful, always holding on to her mother's skirt. They were not rich, but they were not unhappy, at least not in a way anyone noticed. The Carter cabin sat a mile outside of town, closer to the woods than to any neighbor. Jacob had built it himself when they first arrived in Mill Creek 5 years earlier. People said he liked the quiet. Others said he didn't trust crowds. In the weeks before the disappearance, neighbors later said strange things began to happen. Jacob had been seen arguing with a man near the general store. No one knew who he was. He wasn't from Mill Creek. He wore a dark coat and spoke in a low voice. When asked about it later, Jacob said nothing. He only shook his head and walked away. Margaret also seemed uneasy. One neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Wright, remembered Margaret visiting her one afternoon, holding Eliza's hand tightly. She asked me if she believed people could just disappear. I thought she was joking, but she didn't smile. Still, nothing seemed serious enough to cause alarm. Winter came early that year. By December, snow covered the ground so deep that wagons struggled to move. Most families stayed inside. Fires burned all day. Doors stayed locked at night. On the evening of December 14, 1839, the Carters were seen one last time. Jacob stopped by the mill just before sunset. Thomas was with him. Jacob spoke to the mill owner about supplies. He seemed tired but calm. Thomas said nothing, just watched the sky grow darker. Margaret and Eliza were seen earlier that day in town, buying flour and lamp oil. Margaret smiled and thanked the shopkeeper. Nothing seemed wrong. By nightfall, snow began to fall. Not gentle snow, heavy snow, thick snow that erased paths and filled the air. That night, no one heard screams, no one heard horses, no one heard knocking at their doors. The Carter cabin sat in darkness, its windows glowing softly from the fire inside. Then the lights went out. The next morning, Jacob did not arrive at the mill. At first, no one worried. Storms often delayed people, but by noon, concern began to spread. By evening, 2 neighbors decided to walk to the Carter cabin. It was a hard journey. Snow reached their knees, trees bent under its weight. When they arrived, they saw smoke no longer rose from the chimney. The door was closed but unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal, too normal. The fire had burned low but had not gone out. Plates sat on the table. A chair was tipped over near the hearth. The beds were empty but neatly made, and the family was gone. The men rushed outside, searching the snow, expecting to see footprints leading away. But the ground was smooth, perfect, untouched. No tracks leading into the woods, no tracks leading towards town, no tracks at all. It was as if the Carters had vanished into the air. And as night fell again over Mill Creek, the townspeople gathered near the cabin, whispering prayers and fears. Some said the family must have been taken. Others said they left willingly, but no one could explain the snow. And as the lantern light flickered across the frozen ground, one man pointed toward the tree line and said he saw something dark, something tall, standing just beyond the edge of the woods. When they turned their lamps towards it, it was gone. And that was when the real fear began.
The night after the Carter cabin was found empty, no one in Mill Creek slept well. Lanterns burned late into the dark. Doors were locked tight. Mothers pulled their children close. Men stood outside with rifles, listening to the wind and the cracking of frozen trees. By morning, the town had changed. Fear does that to people. At first light, Sheriff William Harper arrived at the cabin. He was a broad man in his 40s, known for being calm and slow to anger. He had seen accidents, fights, and even death, but what waited for him inside the Carter home made him pause at the door. "Nothing taken," he said quietly after looking around. "No blood, no signs of struggle." He stepped outside and stared at the snow, still untouched. The sheriff ordered a full search. Every man who could walk was sent out in groups. They carried poles to probe the snow, looking for hidden bodies. Others followed the tree line, shouting names into the woods. "Jacob! Margaret! Thomas! Eliza!" The forest answered with silence. Hours passed. The searchers found nothing. No broken branches, no torn cloth, no place where someone could have fallen or been dragged. By afternoon, the snow began to fall again, covering even the faint marks left by the searchers themselves. Sheriff Harper gathered the men back at the cabin. "They didn't walk away," he said. "Not in this weather, not without leaving a sign." Someone whispered, "Then how did they go?" No one answered. That evening, the sheriff questioned the townspeople one by one. Mrs. Wright spoke of Margaret's strange question about disappearing. The mill owner mentioned the unknown man Jacob had argued with. Others remembered small things that now felt important. Jacob watching the woods too closely. Margaret jumping at sounds. Thomas once saying he didn't like the trees at night. "Feels like they were scared," one man said. "But scared of what?" the sheriff asked. Again, no answer. Days passed. The snow stopped, but the cold grew worse. The search continued, spreading farther out. Men checked frozen streams, abandoned sheds, even old wells. Nothing. No graves, no bodies, no answers. A week later, something new happened. A boy named Samuel Pierce came running into town just after sunset. His face was pale, his breath sharp with fear. "I saw something," he said, shaking, "near the Carter woods." The sheriff followed him. At the edge of the trees, half buried in snow, they found a small leather shoe, Eliza's shoe. It lay alone, upright, as if carefully placed there. Around it, The snow was smooth, no footprints leading to it, no footprints leading away. The townspeople stared at it in silence. "That wasn't there before," someone whispered. The sheriff picked it up slowly. Inside, it was dry. That night, the search grew desperate. Lanterns swung wildly as men pushed deeper into the woods. The trees seemed closer together now, their shadows long and twisting. Some men said they heard footsteps behind them. Others said they felt watched. One group swore they saw a light moving between the trees, far from any path, but when they followed it, it vanished. By the second week, fear turned into rumor. Some said the family was taken by outlaws hiding in the forest. Others whispered of secret tunnels under the land. A few spoke in low voices of darker things, things that did not belong to this world. The sheriff ignored those words until the journal was found. Jacob Carter's journal was discovered hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the cabin. Its pages were worn, the writing tight and careful. The last entries were troubling. Jacob wrote about being followed, about hearing knocking at night that stopped when he opened the door, about a man who knew his name but refused to give his own. One line stood out more than the rest. He says the snow will cover everything. The final entry was written the night of the disappearance. "If anyone finds this, know that I did not leave by choice. The children are afraid. Margaret is trying to stay calm. There is someone outside." The writing ended there. No signature, no goodbye. The sheriff closed the journal with trembling hands. That same night, another storm came. Snow fell thick and fast, just like before. Near midnight, a shout rang out from the edge of town. One of the searchers, Daniel Brooks, came running back, his coat torn, his face streaked with frost. "They're there," he gasped. "In the woods. I saw 'em." The sheriff grabbed his arm. "Saw who?" "The children," Daniel said, "standing between the trees, not moving, just watching." Men rushed toward the woods with lanterns and guns. Snow whipped into their faces as they ran. At the place Daniel pointed to, the trees stood silent. No children, only the snow. Then one lantern light flickered across the ground, and someone screamed. Pressed deep into the snow were 4 human shapes, side by side, as if bodies had once rested there. But the snow beneath them was untouched, no broken surface, no signs they had ever been placed there at all. And as the men stood frozen in fear, a slow set of footprints appeared in the snow, forming themselves, leading away into the darkness of the forest.
The men did not follow the footprints right away. They stood still, breathing hard, watching as each step appeared in the snow, one after another, moving slowly toward the trees. No one was walking there. No body cast the prints. They simply formed, as if an invisible person was leaving the scene. One man dropped his lantern. It went out with a hiss. "Back," Sheriff Harper said quietly. "Everyone back." No one argued. By morning, the footprints were gone. Fresh snow had erased them, just like everything else. The sheriff knew then that this was no ordinary case. He sent word to nearby towns, asking for help. More men arrived, hunters, trackers, even a preacher named Samuel Collins. They searched again, wider and deeper than before. Still nothing. Weeks passed. Winter tightened its grip. Hope faded. Some families refused to let their children outside after dark. Others spoke of leaving Mill Creek for good. The Carter cabin stood empty, its windows dark, its door nailed shut by the sheriff himself. But the story did not end. In late January, nearly 6 weeks after the disappearance, a woman named Lydia Moore came to the sheriff's office, trembling. "I heard them," she said, "last night." "Heard who?" the sheriff asked. "The children," Lydia whispered. "They were calling my name from the woods." She lived half a mile from the Carter cabin.
That night, the sheriff and 3 men went to her house. They waited in silence, listening. Near midnight, a sound drifted through the frozen air. A child's voice, soft, slow, sad. "Eliza!" one man whispered. Then another voice joined it, a boy's voice. "Help us!" The sound came from the direction of the Carter woods. The men followed, lanterns shaking in their hands. The voices grew clearer, then suddenly stopped. At the edge of the trees, they found something new. A scarf, Margaret Carter's scarf. It was wrapped neatly around the trunk of a tree, tied in a careful knot. The cloth was clean, dry, untorn, as if it had been placed there on purpose. The preacher fell to his knees and prayed. The sheriff felt cold beyond the winter air. The next day, a man from a nearby town came forward. His name was Henry Wilkes. He said he had passed through Mill Creek the week before the disappearance. "I saw a man near the Carter cabin, tall, dark coat, didn't speak much." "Did he say his name?" the sheriff asked. Henry shook his head. "But he said something strange. He said, 'Some families are meant to be erased.'" That night, the sheriff returned to the Carter cabin alone. Inside, the air felt heavy. He walked slowly, lantern held high. When he reached the fireplace, he noticed something he had missed before. Scratches, thin lines carved into the wood behind the hearth. Symbols, shapes, not words. As he leaned closer, the lantern flickered. From somewhere deep in the woods, a single knock echoed. Once, twice, then a third time. The sheriff turned toward the door and saw the handle slowly begin to turn.
The door did not open. Sheriff Harper stood frozen, his hand tight around the lantern as the handle stopped turning and slowly moved back into place. The knocking did not come again. Outside, the woods were silent. Too silent. The sheriff waited a long time before moving. When he finally stepped forward and opened the door himself, cold air rushed in, carrying snow and the smell of pine. No one stood there. The ground outside was smooth and white. No footprints. The next morning, the sheriff made a decision he had avoided for weeks. They would search one last place. At the far edge of the woods, beyond where anyone in Mill Creek usually went, stood an old abandoned mine. It had been closed years earlier after a collapse. Most people avoided it. Children were warned never to go near it. But the snow around the mine was strange. It melted faster there. The search party arrived just before noon. The mine entrance yawned open like a dark mouth. Cold air flowed out of it, steady and deep. Inside, the ground was dry. Too dry. Lantern light revealed something that made the men stop breathing. Footprints. Many of them. Adult. Child. All leading into the mine. None leading out. They followed the path slowly. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber. The walls were marked with the same strange symbols the sheriff had seen carved into the Carter fireplace. In the center of the chamber lay 4 coats. Jacob's, Margaret's, Thomas's, Eliza's. Folded neatly. No blood, no bodies, no graves. Then they heard it. Breathing. From deep within the darkness beyond the chamber. The men backed away in fear. One dropped his lantern. It shattered, plunging part of the mine into shadow. And in that shadow, something moved. Tall, still, watching. A voice spoke, low and calm. "The snow keeps promises." The men ran. They sealed the mine that same day, piling stones and earth until the entrance disappeared. The sheriff wrote his final report carefully. Cause of disappearance? Unknown. No remains recovered.
Mill Creek never found the Carter family. Years passed. People moved away. The town grew quiet again. The Carter cabin rotted and fell in on itself. The woods crept closer. But even decades later, strange things were said to happen on winter nights. Children's voices carried on the wind. Footprints appeared and vanished. Snow melted where it should not. And sometimes, after a heavy snowfall, 4 smooth shapes could be seen pressed gently into the ground near the old mine. No graves, no answers. Only the snow keeping its secret.